And so now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our key speaker to start today's discussions. Dr. Dionne Chamberlain Miranda is the managing director and partner in a successful bilingual consulting regional firm known as Chamberlain Consulting Limited, located in Belize, Central America, which operates on a social entrepreneurship basis. In her volunteer capacity, she is also the chairman of the Belize Coalition of Service Providers. Dionne holds a PhD in business administration and a master's degree in global management from Phoenix University. She has completed a number of specialized training programs, including leadership at the Center for Applied Sciences in Geneva, Switzerland, Scrum, ProSci Change Management, Disc Briefing, and Six Sigma. She continues to pursue growth through training and commitment to the region and development of companies across the world, but specifically the Caribbean region. She's an expert trainer in market access strategy, utilizing Caribbean Export Services Go Global program, as well as in customer service, teamwork, and leadership. The proudest capacity she holds is the wife of engineer Victor Miranda and mother to Matthew and Zachary. She believes that the level to which you can serve others is the level you choose to take care of yourself. Now, there's more about Dionne, and you can read it in the agenda, which we provided for you because her full profile is there. But at this point, I would like to very proudly welcome Dionne and invite her to share her thoughts as she delivers today's opening segment.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you today, and thank you, Kamala, for the invitation. I'd like to start off by emphasizing the words of whom I believe to be the father of good governance, Cyril Hull. And he says that good governance is a victory, not a gift. And this really makes us ponder upon the question, what is the difference of governance and management? I know that sometimes we think it's just semantics, but it's really a crucial distinction that can shape an organization's success. So let's delve into this topic and explore some of the nuances together. You'll see me going back and forth and maybe simplifying things quite a bit. Trust me, I'm aware that I'm in a room with intellects, and so I'm not trying to talk down to you. It's just that we feel that there's often overlapping, and I'd love for us to make sure that we get as very simply into the topics, and then we can understand it a lot better and be able to discuss it after we're done. By definition, a board is an organized group of people with collective authority to control and foster an institution that is administered by qualified executive and staff. So bear in mind, the board plays a serious role, the qualified executive plays a role, and the staff play a role. And it's really the symbiotic relationship of interdependence within the three that will get us to the point of good governance. Boards are or should be strategic thinkers who are responsible for oversight and planning. And they hold three main board duties, which, of course, duty of care, duty of obedience, duty of loyalty. But unlike management, as stewards of the ship, they also bear fiduciary responsibility. And this is something that I find very interesting. Many of us, as someone says, would you like to be on our board? We jump on and we say, oh, that would look great on the CV. However, we also have to realize that fiduciary responsibility is responsibility for acting and doing things to benefit someone else, and can lead to legal implications that could affect us. So it is really important that when we ponder upon being a board, we have to ensure that the persons on the board with us, your management and your staff, are acting with propriety, or else you could be the object of a legal battle at some point in time. And within our Caribbean states, we're well aware of all of these Senate select committees. And honestly, I would never want to be called up for one of those, because that really affects your standing in the community, and your credibility is often questioned post whether you have been involved in the impropriety or not. So it's really important for us to realize that as we are acting and doing things, it is really to benefit someone else. It is whether we are there to benefit the organization, the corporation, but we do have fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and the corporation itself. Of course, if it's just a partnership, it's you and your partners have that fiduciary responsibility. However, we need to exercise financial stewardship as well. And we must ensure that the right skills and practices are in place to do the jobs, whether it be by us, by the rest of our board members, our management team, and our staff members. And they have the skills and practices to do their jobs. And as we've been doing Governance Week and also listening to so many of the different topics that Kamla has been bringing to us from the Governance Institute, in today's world, board members must know AI, they must know climate change. They even need to be as technologically savvy in realizing that there are board software which is being used to ensure that we are meeting the requirements of why we're there in alignment with our strategic objectives as well. And they must also ensure that the organization is in compliance with laws and regulations, which mean that we also need to be well read, because new laws are coming out quite often, and we have to be very aware of how the entire environment affects us. So conducting PESL and SWOT analysis are absolutely key, because we need to understand what are the political, environmental, social, technological, environmental, and legal issues that surround the industries that we are representing at the end of the day. So our key responsibilities as board members are preserving, and of course, when necessary, reshaping the mission, selection of the chief, the executive, the MD, the GM, or whatever we choose to call them, and ensuring that the organization is well managed. And by representing the external world to the organization and the organization to the external world, but most importantly, protecting the organization from external threats. Sounds scary and daunting, right? Do we still want to be board members? But at its core, good governance is about setting the strategic direction, the financial planning, and establishing the bylaws that define an organization's purpose, the values, their structure, and being the guiding light for management. Of course, this role varies for not-for-profit, small startups, or cooperatives, etc. So I would like for you to realize that some of our conversations are focusing on the organization, the corporation, and the company. However, things may shift from time to time, because, for instance, in cooperatives, all members have the power to elect the governing body and vote on key governance decisions in these companies. And in corporations and companies, it is absolutely quite different. So now that we're clear on what boards do and are, it is then apparent that boards, as stewards, need management who are the doers, who take care of the daily operations and implement the goals and values set by these governing bodies. And remember, the governing bodies are the board of directors, and the governing body is also the documents, such as the bylaws, the articles of association, the strategic plans, etc. And most organizations that I've come across, especially in the Caribbean where I live, is that most organizations have a clear, don't understand the clear separation of powers with the different individuals, the subgroups or forums making these different kinds of decisions. So I'm going to take some time to maybe clarify what are the board's roles and their responsibilities, what are the management's roles and responsibilities, and when can they actually intersect or be allowed to intersect. So the breakdown of the duties and responsibilities is extensive, but they're distinct and specific. Whether we take a broad or narrow approach to the difference between governance and management, the differences are extremely clear. And for many of you, and for me, who have served on boards many times, we tend to overlap and intersect, as I've mentioned before, and the lines become very blurry, which should never be. Corporations are more likely to run smoothly when board directors and managers stay in their own lanes. And this clarity is often not the case in some businesses. especially where the roles of the founder, the CEO, and the executive chairman can become blurred because it becomes one and the same. This leads to potential issues, and I've seen this occur in real life in many organizations, which I want to say I had the pleasure to go in and do organizational review, or maybe not quite the pleasure, because it leads to quite a muck-up of the waters, and where owners play the role of executive chair and sit in both spaces, often causing havoc and creating mayhem, which as a consultant creates quite a difficulty for cleanup and reestablishing, because when this havoc and this mayhem occurs, this is where we have that overlapping where board members are creeping into the daily lives and trying to become the doers, when in reality, they are the step back, and management is supposed to be the doers of the strategy and the guidance which their boards are supposed to provide. So understanding these distinctions is crucial for the smooth functioning of any organization, especially for the chair to be able to manage and monitor that their directors don't intervene or step into places that they don't belong and cause these problems. I want you to realize very seriously that effective boards understand and manage this difference of management versus governance. Dysfunctional boards do not. So when we speak about governance, I don't like just the word governance. I like the word good governance. And I like the word good management or leadership, because there are dysfunctional boards, there are poor governance, and there is poor management. And this is what causes organizations to start to plummet and fail. So for anyone joining a board for the first time, it is absolutely important to understand the difference between the roles of the board's governance and the management role of management. Nowadays, directors of boards are expected to serve to make a difference, not just to be the names on the letterheads or donors on a wall. So a lot of us jump into boards or think that being on a board is about really just getting personal acclaim. Board members in today's environment must be knowledgeable. They must be well-read. They must be current and current and I can tell you that the world is moving at a pace that is going, it's not even galloping anymore. We're going to the speed of light. And they must be committed, but they also must have high levels of integrity and understand their function and not to be jumping over into the day-to-day activities of their management's role. The world is starting to expect a great deal more from its directors than even 10 years ago. And these are considerable tasks. I want you to realize that while no one has been imprisoned from the financial crash that happened a decade ago, many feel that this should have happened. And this is where fiduciary responsibility plays its role. So looking at the key differences between governance and management, I really like the explanation by the wheel. They say that the governing body must govern. That is, it must provide leadership and strategy and must focus on the big picture. Governance is about planning the framework for work and ensuring it is done. Planning the framework, not doing the work. They organize the work, and operations or management does the work. As far as possible, the governing body should therefore steer clear from making managerial decisions and getting involved in the day-to-day implementation of strategy. Today's boards must be informed and want to be engaged, both to fulfill their legal obligations and to leverage their time and talent to advise management when needed, when asked. But the question is, what point should the board cross the line and move into running the show? And I'll tell you, it is tempting for directors to believe they're doing their jobs by interfering into management decisions. I remember hearing one trustee of a charity who became really exasperated because board discussions started diving into the detail of management, questioning staff appointments, looking at marketing activities, and wanting to decide about the management of the building. The distinction between governance and management is inevitably harder in smaller organizations where you don't have significant staffing, especially in charities that have few resources. But this level of detail should not be for the board unless there are serious issues. So I'm not saying that boards need to just sit back and allow mayhem to occur, but they should not be jumping in at every level, because that is when we allow mayhem to absolutely occur and not allow our MDs or directors or CEOs to do the job that they were hired for. And it also may lead to the fact that our micromanagement causes them not to manage and lead in the way that they ought to or want to, because they absolutely give up and become deflated by overbearing directors who try to run and take over the wheel. Remember that in commercial boards, the tone of fiduciary responsibility and accountability to the shareholder is key to understanding the difference between this. However, like I said, in smaller boards like NGOs, it sometimes gets a little bit murky. However, we still have to realize that organizations have mandates. If we choose a leader, it is to do the mandate and the work that we are given. So the primary roles of the board then is to choose the CEO and the senior executives, approve major policies, have oversight of corporate strategy and oversight of risk programs. And now risk is one of the biggest areas that most companies have to realize. And so risk and risk compliance is key, and oversight of performance. So every board's primary responsibility is to promote the company's long-term success and deliver the sustainable shareholder value. We are here to operate on part of the shareholder, the beneficiaries. And so at any point, I don't want you to think that I'm saying that boards should be aloof and not deep dive and become involved, but boards need to cross the line when one area is significantly underperforming or putting the business at risk. So if, for instance, sales were declining rapidly, then the board would be in its capacity to ask for a review of the sales and marketing teams, including the competencies of key personnel, and the strategies for effectiveness. Boards often stray into operations and away from policy for two main reasons. They pursue what is most familiar to them. So if I'm a marketer and I'm on the board, I want to be involved in the marketing. And so I need to then restrain myself and allow the marketing team to do what they're doing best. However, if there is an issue, be willing and able to jump in, but only if the chair allows me to jump in. Again, many times we stray away and try to jump into operations when we lose faith in the CEO, MD, executive director, what it is that we call them. And the board and the CEO should be accountable to each other and pursue the same goals. It's a joint effort. So remember, if we feel that our MD or CEO is failing to deliver and we are losing faith in them, we honestly need to have those conversations, bring them in, pull them in, and then get back on track, because the leader has to lead it. And as Professor Garrett said, the fish rot from the head. So if the board is micromanaging because they are not feeling that they have a competent CEO, MD, executive, then the problems really start there, and we will see the systemic effects that will occur throughout the organization following. So all boards need to look at these different areas, and boards need to have periodic reviews. Yes, a board has to review. A board has to be evaluated individually as members, as individual board members. Are we doing what we should be doing? And yes, we need to do reviews and evaluations, whether every 6 months, every quarter, about our group's overall strategy, the medium-term plan and the annual budget, looking at the financial statements and the group dividends, major acquisitions, disposal, capital expenditure, a group's corporate governance, risk management, or risk appetite has to be looked at, because how can our ED be driven or guided if he or she doesn't understand what it is that the board is expecting? A review of the management development strategy. What are we doing to develop our management teams? The innovation and technology aspects, corporate responsibility, and climate change. So it is a director's responsibility to act when necessary. Of course, it has to be with the approval of the chairman, and we can't just go jumping into this at willy-nilly how we feel. We have to trust and have expectations of our executive management, have an open relationship, provide guidance and policy and strategy, and provide sufficient information and direction that will help them to deliver best. However, just as management needs to be developed, our board needs to be developed and grown and trained and given different aspects of training that is required for them to do their job. Because as stewards of these organizations, we are there to guide. And it is important for us to realize that executive management has to expect certain things from their board. Board members need to show up and must be prepared. They have to know sandbagging, expressing their views and timeliness, quality of the information that they receive. And they ought to seek information and additional information from management as they need it, and realize that they must confine their activities to their role as trustees and not allow themselves to drift into management domain, because this is where we see many great organizations fall apart. And as board members, we ought to ensure that our management, senior management team, sees us as loyal to our organization. Remember, in the Caribbean, our countries are small, and many of the little statements that we drop at cocktail parties could be seen as us not being loyal to companies that we are on the boards or management teams for. And this erodes confidence at all levels. Because in the Caribbean, we are well known to, I guess the word is what we call gossip, but I'd like to say that we don't gossip, that we really facilitate the transfer of information from one location to the next. However, management must be responsible for the selection and supervision of staff, development and implementation of our budgets, establishing operating procedures, meeting strategic goals, and keeping the board informed. So in getting back to the role of governance, the board and good governance is where they provide the stewardship, looking at the mission, the values, the vision, and the structure, and only interfering on an as-need basis, because management ought to be given full role to implement, to get things done. So I'm sure that by now I've defined the differences to create the clarity. One gives the guidance, the stewardship, and the other does the strategy. So in terms of distinguishing governance from management, author Barry S. Bader outlined 7 guiding questions, and these are very simple. And if you'd like to take notes on this, this is how I define whether it's a board responsibility or a government responsibility when I'm on a board perspective. Is it big? Is it about the future? Is it core to the mission? Is a high-level policy decision needed to resolve this situation? Is a red flag flying? Is a watchdog watching? Does the CEO want and need the board's support? Based on that, that is when I know if, as a board member, this is time, or as a chairman of a board, when it is that I need to now engage, jump in, which is beyond the first areas where I am only to be there offering the stewardship and guiding on the focus and direction. Remember, in a perfect corporate world, all of the managers and employees know their duties, their responsibilities, and act on them responsibly. They're honest, they're hardworking people with a solid commitment to ethics and integrity. Unfortunately, this isn't the case all the time, and the board of directors is intended to be the check and the balance that oversees employees and all aspects of the company's operations. That is why the board is ultimately responsible if they fail to be diligent in their oversight duties. All companies face known and unknown risks. Technology has made risks more prevalent and intrusive to business. Board directors must practice good governance, and they must work jointly with IT, personnel, and senior executives to oversee risk management and establish these healthy risk appetites that we must have to be able to drive our companies to growth and development. So when we look at our boards and we look at board directors versus management, board members do not have individual power or authority. Neither does the board chair. We work collectively toward the common goal of the organizations. And as I mentioned before, boards ought to refrain from getting directly involved in daily matters. Boards must work closely with managers without being directly involved by providing guidelines, not interference. Management should share financial reports and the annual budget, which have been analyzed with recommendations. Too many times I've been on board where we just get data that has not been analyzed. Management and staff need to get a little bit more analytical and start getting more involved in interpreting so that board members can then lead their expertise. Board recruits, appoints, and monitors the appointment of senior executives, reviews their performance, and sets their pay and other benefits. And boards allow managers to develop their operational strategies and review these strategies to ensure that they align with the overall plan. And of course, deal with unexpected crisis situations as they arrive. So a quick recap. Management has a wide variety of duties and responsibilities, which are quite different from the board, and we must rely on each other. However, the MD, the executive, guides and leads their management team, while the board of directors creates the policies that will guide and take us to that next level. And so in wrapping up, governance skills are needed by all levels. Let's not think that governance belongs to the board because they are the ones responsible for governance. And in terms of skills, managers need a lot of skills. They need motivational skills in this day and time so that they can motivate staff and create that good working environment. And they need to have the 12 different levels of intelligence, which the three most important, in my opinion, are really emotional intelligence, resilience intelligence, and adaptability intelligence. We ought to focus not on the golden rule, which is do unto others what we would like done unto ourselves, but really understanding the other party's role and treating them the way that they ought to be treated, with respect, with integrity, with honesty, accountability at all times. And of course, confrontations in dealing with issues as they arise so that they don't fester and grow into creating negative organizations. While the board provides that overall budget, remember that we all need training in communication. Communication is key for boards to be successful in terms of dealing with management and for management to deal with boards. And so it is absolutely important in that area. Senior managers communicate the lower managerial and budgetary needs that the board provides and must pass along the information that is salient, that is allowed, that based on confidentiality to the staff, and provide the data as is needed. Managers must please or appease people on many different levels and from many different facets of the organization. And so managerial positions are high pressure, high stake jobs that require that we come with cool head and sound decision making. So managers have to have good collaborative skills, good adaptability skills that can take off the pressure by using problem solving to overcome challenges. And we also need to have environmental and economic challenges. We face environmental and economic challenges and must realize that technological advances are absolutely necessary during times of rapid change. And we must be able to communicate these well throughout the entire organization, up to the board and from the board downward as well. Respect is core and mandatory at all levels. We must never see people as commodity, but see them as our way of driving and moving the organization. And so management and boards, although separate and different in what they do, must have a symbiotic relationship of interdependence for us to be able to move forward in good faith, respecting donors or respecting shareholders, conserving and protecting the organization assets, and practicing good governance at all levels. So in conclusion, managing expectations between management and governance is crucial for organizational success. Management and boards must set clear expectations, must have open communication, must define roles and responsibilities to avoid interference of the board in management issues or disrespect by management and staff in reference to discussions and directives placed by boards, as I've sometimes seen and heard where staff feel that the board is too intrusive, getting too involved, and being disrespectful of their expertise at their levels. We need to be accountable and conduct performance evaluations at all levels, and provide and engage in training and development for both management and governance members. Remember, by understanding clear and distinct roles and following these principles, organizations can effectively manage expectations between management and governance. But remember, governance is everyone's role, not only those in charge of governance. And this leads to better decision-making, improved performance, long-term success, and more mature companies where growth is in alignment with their strategic plans, with their governance structures, and exactly where the organization is seeing itself. And I close by reminding you once again that good governance is a victory. It is not a gift. It takes work, it takes energy, it takes understanding our role and our responsibility and taking ownership, accountability, and responsibility at every single level. Enjoy the rest of Governance Week, and it has been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much, Dionne. So you have given us a lovely 15 minutes remaining to interact with you, but I want to tell you this presentation was really, really excellent. There's so many nuggets that you brought to our attention, making very clear the role of the board in terms of their interaction with management, which is one of the major challenges that we have found in the region. So if we're talking about promoting governance excellence for our small states, then this is one of the areas that we need to make very clear. And I really appreciated not just that you outlined clearly that separation between the two roles, but you were also able to bring in as well, weaving those parts when the board can step in when it is they feel that they're losing faith in the CEO or management team. I want to ask you though, and I'm sharing with the rest of the persons in the room that we are opening up now. If persons have any questions or comments, please raise your virtual hand so we can invite you to speak. Or if you want to put it in the chat, that's also absolutely okay. And we can either read it or call on you. And as we allow persons time to think that through and prepare, Dionne, you gave us 7 guiding questions. And I thought those 7 questions were really nice in being able to help us see whose role it is to address. Is it possible for you to go through it again first? Because I captured some of them, but I want to make sure I have all. So the 7 guiding questions.
Yes, and again, if you need more directions from this, there's a book known as Distinguishing Governance from Management, and it is written by Barry S. Bader. And that is who I follow. And so that is when I'm looking at it. The first question is it big? The second, is it about the future? Third, is it core to the mission? Because many times we move away from our mission or our mandates and our focus. And it's important for us to always go back. Is it core to the mission? Is a high-level policy decision needed to resolve a situation? That is when a board needs to interfere as well. Is a red flag flying? And many times I would find that management teams don't like to share when they're in trouble. And it's absolutely important for us to keep, as board members, keep our ears to the ground, because sometimes red flags are flying and they don't alert us to that. And so we have to be aware and know that when red flags are showing, even in some of the data that they provide. Again, many times they're absent boards and the CEO struggles to deliver many things on their own. And that is the reason why that boards have to ensure that they're present. Is a watchdog watching? And I know watchdogs come in many ways. It comes in environmental groups, it comes in media, it comes in competition. Again, I mean, when watchdogs are watching, and we know that we have to be very aware of our environment. Does the CEO want and need the board's support? Like I said, sometimes CEOs like to pretend that they can do it on their own. And that's why it's really important that a great relationship be built from the start. However, we ought to be able to read the signs when a CEO is struggling as well and provide that level of support that they may be needing at the time also.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So, just to repeat it, number one, is it big? Number two, is it about the future? Number three, is it core to the mission? Number four, is it is the high level policy decision needed? Number five is a red flag flying. I really like that. Number five is a red flag flying. Number six, is a watchdog watching? Nice as well. And number seven, does the CEO want or need the board support? These
Yes.
are really, really good, I think, for helping us to be able to see when at a governance level what is happening within the organization, because what it does is it requires for directors to ensure they have a really good understanding of what's happening within the organization as well. So you spoke very clearly about the importance of staying in your lane to avoid blurring the lines.
Yes.
And also, I thought it was a really beautiful point you made when you said that there are directors who step into management thinking that they're really fulfilling their role because they think that's what their function is. And so there's a very thin line, I think, for directors to understand in the importance of they understanding all the inner workings of the organization so that they can identify things such as whether a red flag is flying and whether the CEO may need help even if the CEO does not reach out and ask. So helping directors to see that dynamic that they must ask, they must go in, they must tour, they must walk the place, they must meet the staff, so that would help them to be able to better understand where their organization is at and if they need help. But I also see where persons can then mistake that to be, well, now I need to also be involved.
And this is why they ought to read the reports. Many times, you know, board members don't prepare. And I've been on several boards, and I'm talking governmental boards, NGO boards. You know, they show up and they leave a board meeting and their package looks the same way as when they return back the following week. I mean, the following month, week, whatever it is. And then they come in, but they want to appear to be engaged. So they're trying to butt in, and when the reality is that that has been discussed, that has been ventilated. And it also shows the CEO who's sitting in the room that this person is clueless and only trying to appear to be interested rather than being interested. And so then this is more noisy and boisterous rather than really wanting to help. And so the reality is, even reading these reports to see if they add value. I've been in companies where management would say they don't even read our reports. It's only when it's gone astray. So these red flags should be identified in what it is that you're reading. And when you question it, however, not being prepared, but the fiduciary responsibility makes you know, I better read this, because they could be telling me that there's pilfering going on. They could be telling me many things, but I'm not noticing because I'm not engaged. I'm not involved. And so engagement is absolutely important.
And that actually dovetails really nicely into a very provocative question that Dr. Novak Gowandan has posted in the chat. He asks, have you ever seen instances of management intervention for dysfunctional boards? Is this even possible?
I have seen situations where management, and this I've seen this more on an NGO perspective, because the ED may have the ability to be able to speak to the chairman and say, listen to me, and I'm just using Kamala's name very randomly. Kamala has only come to 3 of the 4 board meetings that we've had for this year. And the bylaws clearly state that if you haven't, I mean, are we doing board evaluations? Are you willing to really remove somebody off the board? And I can tell you, in most boards, either people are embarrassed, unwilling to remove board members for some reason. They will have a lagger on hanging on for years and years and years. This same way that we're willing to have a CEO that we know is not delivering. I think it's a more of a Caribbean thing, because in North America and in Europe, I mean, you see CEOs have a 1-year period, which is why a lot of times these are contract positions. So you know that you have deliverables to lead up to, and you also know that your contract is in danger of not being delivered to you again. But within the Caribbean, I think we become too friendly, and we don't want to hurt his feelings, because we get to know the family, the daughter, the wife, the children. We mingle too much. The board's reason for stepping back also is that too much interference makes us not have objective decision-making perspectives, because we've become too involved. We already live in small countries. We already know each other too well. And that further knowledge and mixing in too much creates us not being able to make objective decisions at the end of the day.
Yes, I can see that exactly, that our culture of building that personal relationships then means we don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. That, or sometimes we think implications for us if we do something because the network is so small. And
Definitely.
can now then be branded. So there's another question in the chat. This is from Mohini. And so she's asking this, she says, in contrast to Novak's question, she's saying, have you ever seen a board's non-intervention in a seemingly dysfunctional senior management team? So is it the non-intervention you meant to ask, Mohini, or the board's intervention in a dysfunctional management team? Just to clarify first.
I can clarify, Kamla, that I've seen both.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen both. So maybe until she clarifies. And that's one of the roles that we play within companies, where companies would hire our firm to go in and do an organizational review to identify where the issues lie. They will know what is the situation. The board clearly knows what the situation is, what the problem is, and they clearly know where they would want it to be, and they will ask you to do some level of analysis. And what we've also done is where they would say, this is what I would want my each member of the executive management team to be functioning as, and this is where they're functioning as. Now, sometimes it's a real disparity in their capacity, because many companies, especially in the Caribbean, we rise because of tenure, not necessarily because of capacity. And that poses quite a bit of an issue, especially in this world where we're expected to have quite a bit more academic and hands-on ability to implement, and exposure, because every single day something is new. And a lot of our executives, they don't network. They don't understand the value of going to our Chamber of Commerce events and being a part of the Caribbean Governance Institute, and learning within their particular environments from their peers or whatever. What we hire them for is the expertise that they will have 15 years later, or only on the job learning. The reality is that when we often examine an executive or a management in terms of where the company is moving, many times the current executive can't necessarily fill that role, or maybe doesn't want to fill that role, because a lot of what I'm speaking about is really about intention and willingness to grow and learn and not stagnate. You know, a CEO who is stuck in their ways and feels that this is where I'm at and this is where we ought to be, will never be able to lead the people below them to where the board's new and greater expectations may be. And I've seen vice versa, where the board is not in a capacity to lead a team because they have not been skilled up, or sometimes it's just a grouping of persons who were there for years and years and years, and they are not seeing where the industry that they're now managing or leading is now moving towards. So I've seen both. I've seen where the board can direct where management ought to scale up and move and shift. And then I've also seen where management feels that board ought to grow and shift. However, I've also seen stagnation in both parts, where I've given a healthy review of where failures lie, and then at the end of the day, subjectivity, friendship, nepotism, relationships, political interference, will not lead to correcting the issue. But I must say, when directions aren't heeded, then organization remains where they started. Because I'll tell you something, many times I'm hired to just confirm what an organization already knows. And then, and so if they need to terminate anyone, they need to say that the consultants recommended rather than they made that rightful decision on their own.
Yes. Yes, and I suppose that is especially useful in the context that Mohini asked, where the board is aware that there's dysfunction happening at management level, but they're not actually acting on it. So when they
Yes.
get an independent evaluation, then they feel justified to come
Yes.
in and be able to act. We have a comment from Kenyatai, and forgive me, I'm not able to ask persons to unmute and join us in the discussion today because we're just 2 minutes away from ending this morning's opening segment. So Kenny has shared that one of the weaknesses he has seen in boards is members who are not able to fully analyze board reports other than financials to be able to pick out the red and white flags.
And he's very right. It's absolutely important, not that you come on a board and you know everything, but what I have found out, and even in what I've been recommending to NGOs specifically, for instance, is identify what are the skill sets and competencies you need on your board, and ensure that that skill set and competence is there. So yes, I may not be financially savvy to read the board report, but then I can deal with the marketing or the PR or whatever section. And this other person may know how to physically run a turbine engine, and that is what the focus of the business is. But then we can lend on that support. However, when you have a board built by either political appointees or nepotism or friendships or just people that we respect, because not everyone you respect has capacity to do what you want them to do when they're on that board. It is very important for you to identify the skill sets, the competencies, the capacity, and the willingness. It comes right back to HR. Want to, can do, and will do to play that role on your boards, and willingness to grow, because you're going to be having to train and upskill, because none of us will ever come to a board fully capable of doing everything that is required. So organizations, the same way that they need to upskill their management team, upskill their staff, upskilling of boards is absolutely necessary, and full engagement of boards is absolutely necessary as well.
Yes, absolutely. And Mohini's mind was the same place with yours. As you were speaking, she was saying identifying for public boards. It's
Okay.
also a difficulty. Right. And as we come to an end, I want to point out a post by Avia. Avia is saying it begs the question, how can we bridge the gaps given our closely knitted Caribbean culture in the context of good governance and management? So Dionne, yes, I'll give you 1 minute to respond to that before we close, but I want to also add, I think that is a very good question, and it's what we really will be spending the entire day seeking to analyze and answer. Go ahead, Dionne.
What I realized, and I'll tell you, this is a true story, and I once had a CEO of an organization realizing that their board was going astray, and their board was going astray because there wasn't proper onboarding occurring. There wasn't clear rules of engagement, clear outcomes or consequences outlined in the onboarding that said when you were not meeting or arriving at where you needed to be. And so I believe that that conversation ought to be had in every meeting. As soon as you start, you said, remember, failure to do this, this, and this provides this, because the same way that everybody wants that compensation, we all want to know that that check is going into the bank every month if I'm on a board. The same way we ought to know what are the consequences for failure. We have that in place in all of our companies for staff. They get appraisals, they get evaluations, they know if they're going to be getting a bonus or they're going to be terminated for lack of. Board members ought to be held on the same level of appraisals, evaluation, and scrutiny, and they ought to know the consequences for not dealing with that. However, they need to be enforced. Once enforcement takes place, whether it be in a company for the management, the staff, and it is put in place for the board, trust me, it all falls into line. And I can tell you that those have been the most exciting, most wonderful boards that I've ever been on. When you go in there, You're excited to be there because everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what the consequences, they know what the rewards are, and we know what the objectives, the goals, the strategies, and we know what our individual function, role, responsibility based on our expertise and what we can bring to the table. And we all move together. And this is whether it's at the management or at the board level. Once those are clearly articulated and clearly repeated and enforced, you will have smooth sailing. Not that it'll be perfect, because we are in a real world filled with chaos. However, it's when we blur the lines and we don't understand that rules of engagement are there for a purpose, to apply the rules of our engagement.
Dionne, thank you so much. I'm so happy that we have you as part of CCGI connected with us. You have shared so much valuable information with us previously, and I knew today was going to be awesome, and you have proven it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks to all of you for listening and wanting to engage, because it is only through this medium that we will arrive at the success. Everybody brings something great to the table, even the questions per thoughts. And excellent. Thank you all very much for having me, and thank you all for being engaged.